Hello YouTube, and welcome back to my channel. I am finally uploading another video after being gone for so long. I want to do a quick intro as to what I'm going to be doing videos on from here on out. My name is Jessica, and if you've watched the couple of videos that I did upload before, you know that they were based on my little lifestyle. And yes, I still want parts of this channel to be dedicated to that, and I'll be uploading videos on that topic occasionally. Now, I took some inspo from two of my favorite YouTubers, Bailey Sarian with Murder Mystery and Makeup Mondays. Absolutely adore her channel. And also Robert Welsh, who does ghost stories and Makeup Mondays. Love his channel as well. And I was thinking, well, since I love history and I also love the paranormal, but didn't want to steal his ghost stories. And there's also so many different makeup looks I want to try, and I figured I would go ahead and put the two together and create this content of haunted history and makeup. I don't know what day I'm going to upload it yet. So, with me being a little, I enjoy all things girly, pink, shiny, glittery, you name it. My aesthetic is basically anything girly and princess, so I'm sticking to makeup looks inspired by that, and also some kawaii and maybe e-girl. Like I said, there are so many looks I want to try, so please stick around and watch me create these awesome looks while talking about the things I love. Now, when I went to go to record this video, I realized that I cannot read the script that I wrote with all of my research on it about the historical places I want to talk about. So what I had to do was record myself giving the history and everything on the location, and then I'm going to include it in this video while I do my makeup. I'm still going to be talking during the video about what I'm talking about in the recording, and I'm going to stop it and reiterate things and add stuff as I go through. But since I wear glasses and I can't see to read, I had to do it that way. I'm hoping that that is okay until I can figure out a different system. Now, I spent hours upon hours doing research on this topic that I'm fixing to talk about on the recording. I am going to be doing my first video on Missouri State Penitentiary. So, now, I'm going to do a makeup look along with listening to the recording of the history and the life and everything at Missouri State Penitentiary. It is considered one of the most haunted locations in Missouri, and I have visited this location a few years ago, way before the pandemic hit. And I'm really hoping to get back to do another more in-depth tour here soon as they start opening the tours up again, which probably won't be until like late, I want to say late spring, maybe early summer, because they only do them so many months since the place is so old. A lot of the buildings don't have utilities hooked up to them. It's usually, it can be kind of hazardous walking through there. You have to sign a waiver to take the tour. So anyway, I'm going to get started on my makeup look for today. Here is a picture of what I'm going to attempt to recreate. Don't know if I'm going to be able to recreate it or not, but I'm going to try. It's going to be pretty and pink and sparkly, and it's going to be kind of like a kawaii look, and we're going to see what that goes. So, I'm going to start the recording. I already did my primer, and I already did my eyebrows, which they still, to me, don't look all that great, but I already did it. So I'm going to start on the eye makeup while the recording is going, and I will stop it occasionally and talk about the content. All right, let's get started on that. I'll be talking about some of the oldest places still around with tragic histories and are considered haunted. My first place I want to talk about is the Missouri State Penitentiary in Jefferson City, Missouri. I've chosen this as my jumping off point because I have visited this location and have taken a history tour and absolutely loved it. This may end up being a 2-part series. Okay, had to stop that for a second. I want to say that I had gotten the Morph X Lisa Frank makeup palette for Christmas, and that is what I'm going to be using for the eyeshadow. Most of the other things that I use are just drugstore stuff that I have gotten over the past couple of months. I do not do a full face of makeup because it just doesn't look right. And I also have freckles, and I really don't like covering those up because that's just part of me. Anyway, back to the recording. To the amount of history here. I mean, this place was a running prison for 168 years. There's so much to talk about. First, I want to go over the basic history of the Missouri State Penitentiary, also known as MSP. So I will be referring to it quite often as MSP because it's a lot easier to say. Now, as for the history, in 1822, Jefferson City, or I may refer to it as Jeff City often, became the state capital, and since other cities were trying to take the spot, Governor John Miller suggested in 1831 that the state's main prison be constructed here to help Jeff City maintain the capital status. So in 1833, the Missouri House of Representatives passed a bill setting aside $25,000 to build the prison. James Donica, a master stonemason who built the first Capitol building in Jeff City, was appointed to oversee the construction. The construction didn't get started until 1834 and didn't open until March of 1836, the same month as the fall of the Alamo in Texas.
By the way, this
and
is
100 years before Alcatraz was ever built. It consisted of just one cell block, the keeper's house, and utility buildings on only 4 acres with an inmate capacity of 40. So between 1836 and its decommissioning in 2004, it expanded to several units, including a 5-story, 240-bed hospital unit that was built in 1938. So it went from housing around 40 inmates to housing around 5,000 by 1936, which made it very overcrowded. It also was surrounded by a very high limestone wall with 15 officer towers, and inmates nicknamed it the Walls. In order for the penitentiary to expand so much and fast, they used inmate labor to build many of the buildings, including A Hall, or Housing Unit 4. Plus, they also built the building that the gas chamber was housed in as well, all from rock quarried on site. Not only did the inmates build the buildings, they also were hired by local businessmen to build the first Capitol building, the governor's mansion, and several local homes that you see up and down the street on the outside walls of the prison. Now, when I took my tour of the prison, they said A Hall was the oldest building still standing, built in 1868 for post-Civil War criminals. As I was doing my research, I found that actually back in 1985, they uncovered buried cells while excavating for an exercise yard for death row. They surmised that after restoring these cells in 2019, that they were built around the 1840s, which definitely makes them older than A Hall. With as old as this place is, I'm sure it's hard finding all the history on the buildings ever there, so they think this was a 3 or 4 story building that was demolished around 1900, and since the tools they had back then weren't as advanced as today's, they tore it down as far as they could, then buried the rest. They have now been restored and are on tour, so yeah, I now need to go do another tour. Okay, so back to A Hall. I did tour this building and took numerous pics throughout. I'll go more in detail about the living conditions and such when I hit part 2. But there were dungeon rooms in the basement that looked straight out of medieval times, where they housed some of the worst criminals, including ones on death row, thus called the Hole. They also put in a shower down there as well, especially since it was still being used till 2004. There wasn't any natural light at all. It was very eerie and creepy. So now the first female inmate named Amelia Eddy came to MSP. She was convicted of grand larceny and sentenced to 2 years. But because at the time the prison was all male, didn't have anywhere for females to go, she was pardoned a few days later and released. Now back to the inmate labor again. The prison became a huge industrial site with 6 shoe factories, clothing, broom, and twine as well. It also had the largest saddle tree factory in the world, all run by the inmates making almost nothing. By the end of the 1800s, the prison was considered one of the most efficient in the country, housing and feeding inmates for 11 cents a day. In 1900, the Jefferson City Star-Tribune declared MSP the greatest in the world. By this time, also, there were almost 60 women housed here as well in a dormitory-style house with a 20-foot wall separating them from the men. Finally, in 1905, an actual building was constructed for the female inmates, which now serves as the front entrance to the penitentiary. Now, time for some MSP facts. 2 infamous female inmates were housed here. Emma Goldman, an anarchist political activist and writer with charges ranging from advocating the use of birth control to inciting a riot. Then there was Kate Richards O'Hare, another activist, and was pardoned in 1920. In 1909, MSP decided to do away with the black and white zebra striped suits the prisoners wore, and they were very happy about that. Also, in 1911, when the state capitol building was struck by lightning and caught fire, the inmates helped to save thousands of documents. There were numerous infamous inmates in and out of there as well, including a famous boxer named Sonny Liston, who was taught to box at the penitentiary by other inmates and staff because he was so young once he was there, and he had to find a way to protect himself from the other inmates as well. A little bit more on Sonny Liston. He was only like 14 or 15 when he was taken to Missouri State Penitentiary. He had been convicted of armed robbery. And because of him being so young, a lot of the guards thought that he had great potential. And with him being as young as he was, and he was also smaller, and with the brutality at the Missouri State Penitentiary, they started teaching him how to box. And somewhere in the 1950s, he became the heavyweight champion of the country, I believe. I'll have to look that up and get back to you. But Sonny Liston, he was a very famous inmate that had spent time at the Missouri State Penitentiary. There was also James Earl Ray, who went on to assassinate Martin Luther King Jr. after he escaped in a bread box. Plus a few serial killers. Back to the timeline. 1914, Housing Unit 3 was added, which became the capital punishment and segregation unit, but unfortunately the riot in 1954 ended this building. So when this prison began, hangings were the death penalty, and the city sheriff doled them out with the whole town watching. Lethal gas was introduced in many prisons across the country, including Missouri State Penitentiary. In 1937, the gas chamber was brought in and set on a concrete slab, then the inmates built the building around it. The door on the chamber itself, to make it airtight, was from World War II submarine. When I took my tour, our guide was a previous guard and told us that it could take anywhere from 3 to 10 minutes for a person to die in this manner, and it was brutal. Plus, because the gas was so lethal, they had to announce to the people who lived nearby to stay indoors until the execution was over and the gas was clear. 39 male inmates and 1 female were executed in this gas chamber, 39 by lethal gas and 1 lethal injection in 1989. After that, death row inmates were transferred to Potosi Correctional Center in Mineral Point, Missouri. Another fact that this is, the guard told us that the death row inmates who went to Potosi were put into general population because they didn't have a death row for them, and since the other prisoners and staff got to know these men, when it came time for their executions, they couldn't do it and transferred them to Bonne Terre to be executed. In 1954, 2 men pretended to be sick, and guards went to check on them, and they overpowered the guards, took their keys, and went down the line, letting hundreds of prisoners out of their cells. 2,200 prisoners were let loose. There were a few deaths on the inmate side and numerous injuries all the way around. By the next day, the police were able to get on top of the buildings with guns and told the prisoners to either get in the cell and shut up or be shot. Most complied. That was one of the biggest and bloodiest riots that they had at MSP. In 1967, Times Magazine gave MSP the title of the bloodiest 47 acres in America. This was a huge prison built. Okay, so now I've got the pinks done. I want to add a little bit of sparkle, and then I'm going to go in and clean everything up and then do all the under eye makeup. There's a little bit of fallout from this palette, which I wasn't completely expecting. This is actually like the second or third time I've used it, and I haven't actually used it for any kind of major makeup look. But anyway, I hope you are enjoying this so far. And back to the recording. In the early 1800s, there were thousands upon thousands of inmates, numerous deaths, murders, suicides, riots, fires, you name it. In its 168-year run, even buildings that they had no records of being uncovered, and there might be more buried. History at MSP. Missouri State Pen operated for 168 years, making it the oldest operational prison west of the Mississippi. It was decommissioned in 2004 due to the age of the prison, the cost of running one as old as it was, and they built a new correctional prison east of town, which is where the remaining 1,355 inmates were transferred to in 2004. This is a very remarkable place to visit. It's rich in history. The architecture is amazing, but at the same time it's also dark and bloody, starting with the treatment of prisoners to the gas chamber, which I will go into more later. If you haven't taken a tour, I highly recommend it. I plan on going back as soon as COVID allows. I want to do the 3-hour more in-depth history tour. And hey, since this is one of the most haunted places in Missouri, maybe a ghost tour. You just never know what the future holds. Side note, when researching for this, I read very briefly of a man wanting to bring lethal gas back. Really? I sure hope not. Now my resources were Wikipedia. I just wanted to jump on at the end of this video. I am sitting here editing, and I have been trying to edit since last night. My video ended up being almost an hour long, and my editor decided to crap out on me and completely delete my video. So I'm having to do it again. And I think because I have to do it again, it's going to be better. We'll see. So I had to cut it in half. The first section is just on the actual history of Missouri State Penitentiary, and my makeup is not completed, so I'm just going to go ahead and download these videos back to back after they're both edited, so that way you can get the full thing. I've been having a really hard time with this video because I recorded it too long. So, note to future self, cut your videos in half so that way they're not so long. I'm going to have to do that for probably a lot of the history projects I plan to do, because they are very large places that have been around for a century or more. Sometimes 2 centuries. It just depends. So, this is the end of the video. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to my channel, leave any comments. I read everything. If you have any suggestions on places you want to hear about, even places that I don't know. If you're in other states other than Missouri, let me know if there's anything out there. I have no problem sitting and doing research. I absolutely adore history. And there's so much that can be learned from our history in the past to not be repeated in the future. So with that, please subscribe, hit the like button, let me know what you think. And if you have any more ideas, let me know. Please leave comments below. I do read them. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day, y'all. Bye.